Joining me once again, Billy Reinhardt from Nets Daily, covering the Nets on a daily basis. And I imagine that is an interesting task at the moment, given everything that we're dealing with this surge in positive cases. Can you just start, Billy, by kind of laying out what we know right now with the team, who's in and out, and where we are?
Yeah, so the Nets have 10 players in health and safety protocols right now. That's a league high, and it's all their big name guys. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, who recently rejoined the team, James Harden, LaMarcus Aldridge, Paul Millsap. I mean, the list goes on and on. Pretty much the entire Nets rotation besides Blake Griffin, Patty Mills, and Nick Claxton. So the Nets are decimated. They've had their last 3 games now postponed, as the league just announced they're postponing tomorrow's game against Portland. The Nets are set to go out west to play. It should have been the Blazers, Lakers, and Clippers. Now that trip goes to a 2-game trip. Obviously, all eyes on that Christmas Day game against the Lakers. The league wants to try and make sure that game goes on as scheduled. But to this point, the Nets don't have enough players. So we have a couple more days here to see if guys can get out of protocol. They have a few guys that went in on December 13th and 14th. So that 10-day span would leave them coming out over the next couple of days, and they should be okay for Christmas Day. But there's a lot to be determined here at this point.
When do you think you'll get a feel for how likely that game is?
I think over the next couple of days, as I said, because the 23rd and 24th, that's the 10-day mark of when those guys initially went into protocol, and that's the amount that players are supposed to based on the NBA's protocol. So as that happens, players could come out earlier if they test negative twice before that period. So you could potentially see a guy like a Kevin Durant be active for that game, although I do think that is wishful thinking. So I think the guys like James Harden, LaMarcus Aldridge, the guys who initially went in at the early end of this, they have a chance for this game on Christmas Day. But the rest, I mean, everyone's bodies deals with this virus differently. So it's very difficult to determine.
Have you been able to get any sense, Billy, of what is sort of happening inside the locker room or how the players are dealing with this? I mean, obviously you mentioned a league high with 10 players in these health and safety protocols, not even having, a lineup to put out there on the floor. I mean, has there been any sort of sense that you've been able to gather around what's happening inside the team?
Steve Nash said most of these guys are asymptomatic, so that's the good thing there. Everybody on the Nets is fully vaccinated besides Kyrie Irving. All indications are that his symptoms are minor, if any, as well. So the guys seem to be doing well. That's the good thing there. Blake Griffin mentioned the other day post-game that what's it like with all these guys going in and out of protocols, and he said it's pretty much like when you're in class and when you're a kid and you get called out of class and everyone's like, oh, he's like, I mean, you were with these guys for shoot around earlier in the morning, some guy pops up with a positive test and they're just dropping like flies. So it's a really unique circumstance, and the Nets have signed 4 different players to hardship exemptions. I mean, they're really scouring the league for anyone right now, and even still they don't have the minimum players to play. So the Nets are beat up. The league, I think, is doing the right thing by postponing these games, allowing the Nets to play when they have more of a fair, competitive, in terms of these games, they'll be more fair and more representative with the Nets, who the Nets are as a team. So it's a tough situation right now. I think the players are doing their best to deal with it. You feel for them, though, going into this holiday season. They got to be quarantined and away from their families, not only from a basketball perspective, but just the human side of things. That's a tough thing to deal with, but hopefully all goes well and these guys are back sooner rather than later.
I'm sure that's a really frustrating part of it. All these players that have kids, like you mentioned, and families not really understanding what's going on. And at the beginning of this pandemic, when the league was kind of praised for being more progressive and shutting things down quickly, most of the discussion, I think, was around just figuring out the virus, the physical symptoms, the potential repercussions for getting it long term. Now, I think to your point, what you just noted on, we're moving into this sort of phase of competitive integrity, maybe putting the spotlight there more than it has been in the past. I mean, you're covering a team that really has had an unfair shake of this, and we don't know what's to come over the next couple of months. But I mean, is it the right call to continue to figure out how to move forward with the season? You heard Adam Silver say this week that that's what they plan on doing. For a team like the Nets, is that fair?
All indications are, as you said, that's what the league is trying to do. Teams and owners are pushing for that. Obviously, there's the money side of things, which drives a lot of the decision-making in our world. But I think there's also a belief that players and teams have done all they can. They're following CDC guidelines. They have a 97% vaccination rate in the league. Only 65% of those eligible for boosters have gotten boosters to this point. So that's a number you want to see rise. But as long as these players are taking protocol, their strict adherence to the protocol that the league has implemented on them, I mean, they're doing everything they can. And at this point, the good news about the vaccines and the Omicron variant is that while it's very contagious, as you know, The symptoms seem to be a little bit more minor. So I think there's a belief that this is something we're going to have to live with going forward. And as long as we take the proper precautions, that's something that the league feels they can continue to go on with.
You just mentioned the most recent cancellation. So the Nets haven't played since December 18th with this trio of games that's been canceled, and they're bringing players up and they're just trying to figure out a way to make it work. I mean, if they can get the guys back who tested positive asymptomatically early on for this Christmas game, what do you expect from the team?
Yeah, there's a question. Even if these guys test out of protocols, which there's an expectation that a couple of them will the Nets play them on Christmas Day? I mean, these guys have been cooped up in their houses or apartments for a week now, if not more, and they presumably have not had a lot of activity. So, I mean, there's a question if these guys are in shape to jump right back into things. I know the Nets will have some caution. They're a conservative organization in regards to injuries and player health in general. Last year, Kevin Durant went into protocols for 10 days. He came back out. He played the first game back in Golden State. He hurt his hamstring and he was out a month. So, I mean, that's a concern for the Nets, especially with a guy like James Harden or Kevin Durant. They're stars that are supposed to lead the way. So it's uncertain at this point if the Nets are going to play those guys, even if they come out of health and safety protocols. They only have 2 games on this trip now since the Blazers one has been postponed. The Lakers on Saturday and then the Clippers also on that trip. So the Nets might decide to just punt on this West Coast trip, hope to get their guys back in full of a couple days of practices because they haven't even practiced since that last game. They've been canceling over the last couple of days. So this team has really not seen each other in a week and for some of them 10 days. So it's been a long time. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Nets throw those guys right back in the lineup.
And just lastly, Billy, I mean, what's this been like covering this for you, kind of going hour by hour, day by day, and figuring out, is the team going to play? Is it not going to play? Who's playing? I imagine this is an unusual situation. We've been dealing with it for quite a while, but this seems like a pretty aggressive re-entry into protocols and stuff that we really thought we were done with.
I've been covering the Nets since 2017, and never did I think over the last couple of years that I'd have to become a health and safety expert. I'd have to deal with the status of vaccinated and unvaccinated players. I mean, it's really crazy what's happened with the league and the coverage, and especially the Nets with all their stars, their title expectations, Kyrie Irving's situation. I mean, there's a lot to cover, and it's a wide scope for a reporter like myself. So, I mean, you just hope these guys get back on the floor and they get to play basketball, and that's all we love to see. But obviously, there's stuff that is more important at this point, and you just hope everyone gets through safely.
All right, Billy. Thanks for the update. We appreciate it. Best of luck to you covering the team, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.